The World Cup in Qatar has served up group stage ties of Switzerland versus Serbia and Iran versus the United States, just 4.5 years after the World Cup in Russia opened with a clash between Russia and Saudi Arabia, and also saw Switzerland and Serbia meet in the group stage. In short, it hasn't been a great few years for those who seek to keep politics out of football. When Switzerland and Serbia met in Russia in 2018, Switzerland came back from a goal down to beat Serbia 2-1. Granit, Xhaka and Xherdan Shaqiri were the goal scorers for the Swiss, and both players celebrated their goals by doing this, causing a minor diplomatic crisis between a few different countries, none of which were actually Switzerland, who both players were representing. Kosovan and Albanian politicians lauded the duo, whilst the Serbian press lambasted them, and FIFA felt forced to intervene, fining both players 10,000 Swiss francs, which is almost £9,000, and accusing them of unsporting behaviour contrary to the principles of fair play. And then, within the blink of an eye, the football community pretty much just moved on. This was in the midst of a World Cup after all. Switzerland's 2-1 win did ultimately see them progress ahead of Serbia from their group, but within days, Germany had suffered a shock group stage exit at the hands of the South Koreans, a much bigger story, and not long after that, the Swiss bowed out quietly against Sweden in the round of 16. In other words, the news cycle was concerned with Xhaka and Shaqiri's goal celebrations for all of about 15 minutes. It would seem that the global public just wasn't all that interested. But whilst football moved on, with very little actually having been learnt or understood outside of the Balkans about the significance of the gesture, why it caused such furore within the region, or why it was two Swiss internationals performing it, tensions within the region persisted, and continue to persist to this day, ahead of the exact same fixture being replicated this evening. So, in light of a huge game between Serbia and Switzerland, which will once again dictate which of the two teams progresses through to the knockout stage, I wanted to take a closer look at the most controversial goal celebration in the history of the FIFA World Cup, and the backstory behind it. The reason why Xhaka and Shaqiri's celebrations didn't really capture the public's imagination outside of the Balkans is because most people had no idea what it meant, because it is a gesture that is tied up in the internal conflicts and tensions within the region, which most people either don't know anything about or don't really understand. And the reason they don't understand it is because it is extremely convoluted. The crossed hands or eagle gesture that Xhaka and Shaqiri performed, which is known as Shenja I Flamarut in Albania, literally flag sign, is most simply a symbol of Albania and Albanians. This is the flag of Albania, a small country in southeastern Europe of roughly 3 million people, which has existed in some form or another as a political entity for a little over 100 years. I'm sure you can see the similarities. But the symbolism of the eagle predates the existence of the political entity of Albania by almost 1,000 years, and has been used by ethnic Albanians since at least the 11th century. That is why the symbol is relevant to Granit Xhaka and Xherdan Shaqiri, two ethnic Albanians whose families moved from Kosovo to Switzerland during the Yugoslav and Kosovo Wars, and those two weren't the only ethnic Albanians in that Switzerland squad. During the 1970s and 80s, a number of almost exclusively male migrant workers moved from Yugoslavia to Switzerland due to economic factors, working predominantly to send money home and to support their families, often looking to escape from poverty and an array of economic crises. The number of Yugoslav citizens living in Switzerland rose from almost 25,000 in 1970 to over 60,000 in 1980, and by 1990, that figure had risen to more than 172,000, an increase of almost 600% within the space of just 20 years. Yugoslavia came into existence at the end of World War I, initially as the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, then the Kingdom of Yugoslavia from 1929, the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia following the end of World War II and eventually the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia from 1963 onwards. Only one man ever held the title of President of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Josip Broz Tito, from 1953 up until his death in 1980. And through his campaign of brotherhood and unity, and rapidly and at times violently putting down any and all nationalist or separatist movements, Tito was somehow able to maintain relative peace and calm within a very delicately composed union. When Tito died in 1980, though, everything started to fall apart. Economic and political crises throughout the 1980s gave rise to nationalism and malcontent, and the breakup of Yugoslavia, along the borders of its republics, initially into 5 separate countries, led to the Yugoslav Wars. A whole series of separate but interwoven ethnic conflicts, wars of independence, and insurgency movements broke out, including the Bosnian genocide, as roughly 140,000 people were killed in total in what was Europe's deadliest armed conflict since World War II, up until at least the Russo-Ukrainian War, and a further 4 million people were displaced. Granit Xhaka and Xherdan Shaqiri are both of Kosovar Albanian descent. Shaqiri was born in the village of Xhaka, which is part of modern-day Kosovo, in 1991, before the collapse of Yugoslavia, but his parents and 3 siblings all emigrated to Switzerland, where he was raised, in 1992. Xhaka, on the other hand, was born in Switzerland, in Basel to be more precise, to Kosovar Albanian parents who had moved to Switzerland in 1990. Xhaka's father was arrested in the former Yugoslavia as a 22-year-old student in 1986 for protesting against Yugoslavia's central government in Belgrade and for campaigning for Kosovo's independence. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, meanwhile his brother, so Granit's uncle, received an even more severe 15-year sentence. Whilst imprisoned, Granit's father was tortured, and when both he and his brother were released prematurely, after 3.5 years behind bars, he fled to Switzerland, where Granit and his brother Taulant, who plays for Basel, were both born. They might have been raised in Switzerland then, and owe a debt of gratitude to the country, but both Xhaka and Shaqiri are children of the Yugoslav Wars, and both are acutely aware of Kosovar Albanian struggle and persecution. Shaqiri famously wears football boots, which display both the Kosovo and Switzerland flags on either side, a decision which prompted criticism from Serbian centre-forward Aleksandar Mitrovic, who questioned why Shaqiri didn't represent Kosovo if he loved the country so much in the build-up to that 2018 World Cup tie. Notably, it was Mitrovic who opened the scoring in that game after just 5 minutes, before Xhaka's equaliser and Shaqiri's 90th minute winner. Xhaka and Shaqiri's stories may be unique in the sense that they scored crucial goals against Serbia at a FIFA World Cup finals. That is quite unusual, but they are anything but unique in terms of their upbringing. Of the 172,000 almost exclusively male migrant workers from Yugoslavia that were living in Switzerland in 1990, a significant chunk were ethnic Albanians, the majority of them hailing from Kosovo. That meant that once the Yugoslav Wars broke out in 1991 and enormous numbers of people fled the conflicts, the obvious destination for many of them, and especially many Kosovo Albanians, was Switzerland, where they might have already had friends, family, or some kind of connections to help them settle in and find work. The history of Kosovo has long been contentious. In 1389, and yes, I am afraid that we do have to go that far back because that date is so often invoked by Serbians, Kosovo was the scene of the epic Battle of Kosovo, in which Serbia sought to repel the invading army of the Ottoman Empire. It was a devastating battle in which the majority of both armies were wiped out. Both Prince Lazar, who was the ruler of Moravian Serbia, and the Ottoman Sultan Murad I were killed, and the battle ended in stalemate. Serbian manpower was so significantly depleted, however, that it meant that they could not withstand future onslaughts from the Ottomans, and the territory was eventually lost. Over 500 years later, in the First Balkan War of 1912 to 1913, the Balkan League devastated the dwindling Ottoman Empire, claiming 83% of their European territory, and that included Kosovo. The 1913 Treaty of London recognised Serbia as now being in control of Kosovo, but of course, just 6 years later, Yugoslavia was formed under the title of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes. Within the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia from 1945, Kosovo was part of the Socialist Republic of Serbia, originally the People's Republic of Serbia, but it was primarily part of Yugoslavia. Even still, at least from the start of the 1960s, Kosovo had significant autonomy outside of Serbia itself, and in 1974, it was recognised as having autonomous status, along with Vojvodina, in the north of the country. The Kosovo region became the Socialist Autonomous Province of Kosovo within Yugoslavia, gaining de facto self-governance. The vast majority of people in Kosovo, both then and now, aren't Serbs, they are ethnic Albanians. There is still a significant minority of ethnic Serbs, particularly in northern Kosovo, and there was discontent amongst many of them, and many Serbian nationalists outside of Kosovo, that Belgrade had lost almost all autonomy over the region. Slobodan Milosevic used that discontent to fuel his rise to power through a wave of Serbian nationalism. His supporters overthrew the politicians of Kosovo, Vojvodina and Montenegro, and in 1989, Milosevic stripped Kosovo of their rights of autonomy that had been established in 1974. The puppet government that Milosevic installed in these formerly autonomous regions gave him effective control through voting rights throughout all of Yugoslavia, but the non-Serbs and non-Serb nationalists, unsurprisingly, were less than impressed. Gone was any pretense of brotherhood and unity from the Tito days, replaced by notions of a greater Serbia. The Croats, Slovenes and Bosniaks all walked out in protest, dissolving the League of Communists. Meanwhile, non-Serbs began a mass exodus out of the Yugoslav People's Army, better known as the JNA, turning it effectively into a Serbian nationalist armed forces, tasked with quashing several emerging separatist movements. In Kosovo, the Kosovo Liberation Army, or KLA, was founded in response to the persecution and subjugation of ethnic Albanians, and they began orchestrating attacks on police forces and Secret Service officials who abused Albanian civilians. What had begun as an insurgency turned into a full-scale war in 1998 when the Kosovo War began, and Milosevic implemented a brutal crackdown on Kosovo's Albanian population. The bloodshed, forced displacement, often through threat of death, and massacres prompted outrage within the international community, as images of children with bullets through their skulls spread around the world, eventually convincing NATO to intervene. After Milosevic rejected an ultimatum to halt the violence, NATO carried out a 78-day bombing campaign in Yugoslavia until the JNA finally withdrew from Kosovo. The KLA was subsequently disarmed, whilst almost 200,000 Serbs and Roma left Kosovo, partly through fear of revenge attacks, further increasing the dominance of ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. One of the exceptions to that dominance, in and around the city of Mitrovica, was the site of the deadliest clash between Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo since 1999 and 2004, when 19 people were killed. In February 2008, with pro-independence parties having dominated Kosovan politics for the previous 4 years, Kosovo declared its independence, which was recognised by Europe's major powers and the United States, but not by China or Russia. This all provides important context for the 2018 World Cup clash between Serbia and Switzerland, which took place in Russia. Between 1990 and 2000, an estimated 1.2 to 1.45 million Kosovar Albanians fled Kosovo, many of them relocating to Switzerland. Immigrants from the former Yugoslavia today make up around 6.5% of Switzerland's population, making them the largest immigrant population in Switzerland ahead of Italians, and around 50% of those are Albanians, the vast majority having arrived in Switzerland from Kosovo. In Switzerland's 2018 World Cup squad alone, Haris Seferovic's family hail from Bosnia, Josip Drmić's family arrived from Croatia, and Valon Barami, Blerim Jamaili, Granit Xhaka, and Xherdan Shaqiri are all ethnic Albanians. Even Switzerland's manager, at the time, Bruno Petkovic, is a Bosnian Croat who was born in Sarajevo and holds a Bosnian, Croatian, and Swiss passport. The fact that the 2018 World Cup was held in Russia, which doesn't recognise Kosovo and has extremely strong relations with Serbia for a variety of reasons, including Russia and Serbia's shared Slavic and Christian Orthodox heritage, a key constituency in Russia upon which Vladimir Putin depends, added an extra element of heat to that game between Serbia and Switzerland. The locals in the crowd in Kaliningrad were not neutral, cheering loudly for Serbia. Meanwhile, the ethnic Albanians in the Switzerland squad, like Xhaka and Shaqiri, were booed not just throughout the entirety of the match, but also when their names were read out and their images displayed on the big screen before the game had even started. A number of Serbia fans in the crowd wore t-shirts emblazoned with the face of General Ratko Mladic, a convicted Bosnian Serb war criminal who was found guilty of committing crimes against humanity and genocide by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in 2017. As well as charging both Xhaka and Shaqiri, FIFA would later charge the Serbian FA for their supporters donning those t-shirts at the World Cup. It was in this context, in a cauldron of anti-Albanian and pro-Serbian sentiment in Kaliningrad, having been booed all game by supporters, in some cases supporters who were displaying their support for a genocidal war criminal, that Granit Xhaka and Xherdan Shaqiri celebrated their vital goals by performing the double-handed eagle gesture. There is no way of knowing, of course, but I suspect that both players might have made that gesture spontaneously because of the atmosphere within the ground that day, rather than having pre-planned anything because they were playing against Serbia, or because of Mitrovic's comments. It wasn't the first time that tensions between Serbs and Albanians had flared up at a football match. In October 2014, in a Euro 2016 qualifier between Serbia and Albania, the game had to be halted after a drone flew over the ground, displaying a Kosovo flag, sparking a brawl in the stands. Since the 2018 World Cup, not a lot has changed. And, if anything, tensions have actually gotten worse, particularly over the last few months. In July of this year, the so-called North Kosovo crisis became the latest in a series of flare-ups and heightened tensions that seem to occur every 2 to 3 years. The reason for the crisis might seem banal, caused by the expiration of the 11-year validity period of documents for cars in Kosovo, but it put Kosovo's Serb minority community in direct conflict with the government of Kosovo once again. In 2011, an agreement was reached between Serbia and Kosovo on the use of neutral license plates by the northerners of Kosovo, which was due to end on July 31st, 2022, after which point, Serbian citizens entering Kosovo would be issued with temporary Kosovo documents and Serbian ones would become invalid. This might still be seeming quite banal to you, but since Serbia doesn't recognise Kosovo, it also does not recognise its rights to establish its own rules around car registration. And since most Kosovo Serbs also do not recognise Kosovo's independence, and consider themselves still to be Serbian citizens, they reject anything that implies, or in this case, outright states otherwise. So serious has been this car registration crisis that the Serbian army was put on high alert and the NATO-led Kosovo force sent troops to patrol the streets. Tensions were further heightened when Vladimir Đukanović, a member of the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, a misnomer if ever there was one, they are not progressive, in fact, they branched out of the far-right Radical Party, stated that it was necessary to denazify the Balkans, invoking the same language as Serbia's allies when it comes to the issue of Kosovo, namely Russia and Vladimir Putin, who had just massively escalated his country's invasion of Ukraine, creating Europe's largest and deadliest conflict since at least the Yugoslav Wars, for the same claimed reason. The US and the EU have twice convinced Kosovo to temporarily postpone the switch of car license plates, easing tensions somewhat, but inevitably, only temporarily. Both Serbia and Kosovo want to become members of the European Union, but neither will be granted membership until relations between the two have been normalised. And inducting one of them before the other would be deemed extremely controversial, since they could then just veto the other one being admitted. Only weeks ago, Serbian Foreign Minister Ivica Dačić said that a proposal submitted by France and Germany offering Serbia a faster track towards EU membership in exchange for Kosovo's membership in the United Nations was rejected on the grounds that it starts from the precedent that the independence of Kosovo is already a foregone conclusion, and that, quote, Serbia cannot accept that. The reality, however, is that Serbia cannot and will not regain control of Kosovo. Kosovo is often referred to as being Serbia's Jerusalem, and it is true that Kosovo is home to a great deal of important Serbian architecture, churches, and cultural and heritage sites, which ought to be protected. But as Christopher Hitchens once pointed out, Kosovo is less like Serbia's Jerusalem and more like Serbia's Gaza or West Bank, given that the population is now roughly 93% ethnic Albanian, and anti-Serbian sentiment is understandably so strong given the massacres and ethnic cleansing that took place within most people's lifetimes. Following Switzerland's 2-1 win against Serbia at the 2018 World Cup, both managers, who were both born in Bosnia, had plenty to say. The Serbia manager, Mladen Krstajic, went the furthest, calling for the referee from that game to be put on trial for war crimes at The Hague, quote, like they did to us, end quote. Playing further on that victim complex, Krstajic added, unfortunately, it seems that only the Serbs are condemned to a selective justice, once the damned Hague, and today in football the VAR. Yeah, unhinged. Krstajic is gone in 2022, he now manages the Bulgaria national team, but the tensions still remain, and controversy reared its head once again this week when an image was shared of the Serbia dressing room in which a banner displaying a map of Serbia, including Kosovo, hung from one of the walls along with the words "No Surrender," a slogan that is associated with Serbian chauvinism in Kosovo. The Kosovo FA have already lodged a complaint against Serbia to FIFA at a World Cup that has been rife with political entanglement, which FIFA has tried and badly failed to quash, not only failing to successfully suppress it, but at times actually exacerbating a series of problems and making them far, far worse. It is with that backdrop that Serbia take on Switzerland this evening. Not Kosovo or Albania, it is worth noting, who failed to qualify for the World Cup, but Switzerland, by virtue of Switzerland being home to so many former Yugoslav citizens and Kosovar Albanians, which is itself only the case because of Milosevic's mad and evil campaign of Serbian nationalism and flagrant disregard for human life. You couldn't really make it up. Yugoslavia was almost certainly doomed to break apart from the moment that Tito took his last breath, but Milosevic authored its death certificate, accelerated its demise, and ensured that it would be a bloody and shameful end. Unlike Russia, Qatar does recognise Kosovo's independence, and this evening, both Xhaka and Shaqiri are likely to start for Switzerland. Away from the political tensions, machinations, and past indiscretions, there is very little to split Switzerland and Serbia from a footballing perspective, ranked 15th and 21st in the FIFA World Rankings. A win for either side will send them through to the knockout stage ahead of their opponents, but a draw should be enough for Switzerland so long as Cameroon don't beat Brazil by at least 2 clear goals. It is one of international football's more unusual rivalries, and hopefully you now have a better understanding of the controversy that surrounded Xhaka and Shaqiri's goal celebrations in the Balkans, and the background to tonight's game, or just the repeat fixture in 2022, if you are watching this video after that game has already been played. Thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video or found it remotely interesting or informative. I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on either Twitter or Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.